Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back here again. Most conferences have an after-dinner speaker whose major purpose is to spend the time between dinner and the next day. As I'm the after-lunch speaker, this is meant to be a relatively light talk. I might mention the word customer a couple of times, mostly by mistake. But the idea is to be able to give you an overview of what numbers are, what they can do, how they might matter to you. So in the real world that you live in, some of this is interesting. In case it's not, don't worry, go to sleep, I'll wake you up at the end. So this will be episodic. There'll be no theme to this. So some of this will be interesting, some of this will be not. I wanted to begin with a plot and something from way back in time. When I went to do my PhD, the computer system in the university was called Playfair. I wanted to find out who is Playfair. Who was this gentleman that this statistics department is so proud of? This is a chart that Playfair came up with. He came up with this around 250 years ago. So people were doing analytics at that time as well. Now he had no computers, he had to draw things. And he drew a fair amount. This pointer may or may not work. I know this is a very dense slide. The little skyline that you see resembling the Bombay skyline, that's the price of wheat. The little line that you see below it, the red line, like a hill, that's wages. How much people got paid. The little segments that you see are who's the king, your business conditions. This is artwork. And I want to talk about three things with respect to this. One, data has been making sense to people for quite a long period of time. Two, you don't need computers to process data. Three, agriculture is important and has been for quite some time. We talk about healthcare, we talk about education, but as we just saw, food is important. So the variety of applications to which analytical techniques have been put to has changed over the years. Today there's a lot of focus on marketing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm not a marketing specialist myself, but there's a reason for it. And there's a reason why this is going to change as the years go by and different fields have come and have gone by. So this was England some centuries ago. This is India about 80, 90 years ago. So P.C. Mahalanobis was an interesting man. He began his career as a physicist. He was a roommate to Ramanujan. He then went and set up a place called the Indian Statistical Institute, where I graduated from. His picture is superimposed on what is the library building of that in Kolkata. And then he ended his career as Jawaharlal Nehru's chief planning expert, for which he's getting a lot of flack these days. He's not in fashion. The Mahalanobis plan is not the way to go these days. But he was a man of eclectic tastes, but one sort of point of view. And that point of view that he had was that numbers made a certain kind of sense. And he chose to use that sense in a variety of ways, in a variety of disciplines. And the way he used numbers varied from era to era. In the 1930s, he did an interesting study. Jute is not a popular crop these days, although I don't know about Mumbai, in Bangalore, you can't use plastic anymore, at least of a certain thickness. So which means fabric might come back in fashion once more. Jute was a crop on which the economies of Bengal, that is West Bengal and now the current Bangladesh, depended a lot on. And the idea was you needed to have a good idea as to how much jute there was. For the British, this was an economic matter because there was a reason they were in India and there's a reason they cared about how much jute there was. They wanted to know. And so they went and they did investigations and they said, this is how much jute we have. Mahalanobis said, with a lot less money and a lot less time, I can tell you a lot better. So the British said, how are you going to do this? He said, I'm going to take what is called a sample. And they said, but we take a census. How will you do better with a sample? But he took a sample and he got better results. Today is not the day to go into details as to how that happened. But from that point onwards, sampling became something that was a very powerful tool in discovering things. I don't need to know everything about everything to get information. To find out whether you are ill or not, I need a sample of your blood, not all of it. So, and what the system that Mahalanobis set up became famous worldwide, and he became recognized for it. And the Indian School of Statistics is still recognized for that kind of thinking even today. So that's a contribution to lots of people in your immediate geography for doing something that is globally recognized. Today, sampling is not fashionable anymore because you don't sample. You do something that is fashionable today. You do something called big data. Big data used to be spelled as 2 words. These days it's spelled as 1 word with a small d in the middle. And the point of big data is simply this. I don't plan the way the data comes to me. Let it simply come as a stream. Let people talk on the internet. Don't sample them. Don't censor them. Don't figure out who you're going to listen to. Let the data come to you. Get data from satellites. Get data from images. Get data from wherever you want. But let the data come to you. This is a very big difference from Mahalanobis' day. In Mahalanobis' day, it was first tell me what the problem is, and I will solve it for you. Now, the approach is, here is the data that I have. Tell me what problem you can solve. Which in certain cases sounds very silly. However, what it has meant is that the way data is perceived has changed. The profession that contributes to data has changed. I'm a statistician by training. Statisticians normally get, when they get interviewed these days for analytics jobs, don't get the job. And the reason is they usually get asked the following question. I have this data, what can you do with it? And the statistician's typical answer is, well, what do you want me to do with it? To which the business leader's question is, if I knew that, why are you in the room? Now, this is a vicious cycle that goes around until the interview mercifully ends. But what that means is that there has been a stylistic change in the way data is viewed in the community. So why is this now a field that is essential in IT field? Is because most of the new data that is coming in from computers. People find it hard to collect data. So if you have to draw blood, someone has to go and draw the blood. That's physical effort. If I want to figure out how much you've been running, I just need to put a little band around you and then do nothing. Do nothing. And by doing nothing, I get, kilobytes, petabytes, whatever number of bytes you want. This is huge because there is no effort in data collection. As was pointed out in the morning, there's zero marginal cost. Which has meant that we now have more data than we know what to do with. And from a marketing perspective, that means that you are sitting on a gold mine and nobody wants the gold. But you think it's really valuable. And that's a situation that we're all trying to go after. This might change in the future. This is where we are at this moment. In the future, we might figure out better and better ways of processing it. New communities, new specializations, new professions will emerge, which can handle this a little better. But from Playfair to Mahalanobis to the present day, this has been an evolution. Now, this is continuing to change. Just a show of hands, how many of you have actually used one of these? Good. I feel young already. These were very useful devices. This was what was programming when we were younger. Which means that you went into a computer and you typed something in, and that was converted into a card which had holes where you typed things in, so to speak. And then you ran the program, which typically meant somebody actually ran to the computer with this deck of cards. However, this itself was a huge innovation for its time. Because what Fortran did, and I kept the older spellings, which is formula translated, was Fortran allowed people who were not experts at building a computer to run a computer. Now, how many of you can drive a car? Good. How many of you can build a car? One, but not too many. In the early days of computers, there wasn't really a difference between building a computer and running a computer. It wasn't easy to run a computer. It was a very complicated beast. But things like Fortran said that no, you can actually drive a computer. You don't need to know how it works. You don't need to know about transistors. You don't need to know about silicon or whatever they used. You just need to know something called programming. It became like a language. So today we talk about democratization of data. This was democratization of computing. And it was a very big change. The generation that's coming will actually not do a great deal of programming. I have a 3.5-year-old daughter. She can't hold a pen, but she can do this, right? On her tablet. She knows how to open Windows. If she grabs a cell phone by mistake, she knows exactly where the pictures are. So a generation is coming along that will do programming and analytics without actually writing anything. That methodology of analytics is already existing. That way of doing things is already becoming more and more popular. So from manually creating data to programmatically using it on a computer with experts, then automatically generating data, and now being in a situation where you can automatically process the data as well. So what this has meant is that at some point in time, this is going to be a routine way of doing things. And you won't know how it is done. Just like today, you drive a car without caring about why it drives. You press the accelerator, something happens. Today's cars are in fact even fancier. So when you turn the wheel of a modern car, that's just psychological. You can press a switch for all you care. It just gives a signal that tells the car, okay, turn right. Nothing is turning right, that's just an electrical signal. Psychologically, it feels more comfortable to you to turn something to the right and the car goes to the right. You might as well press a button or said, tiger, tiger, burning bright, if you program the car that way. So being able to figure out how to do analytics is going to be changing. Now, what happens once you've got the ability to manipulate programs, once you've got the ability to manipulate data, and then to some extent you lose that ability? In between, there's a generation that's going to be very confused, that's very worried. How much of this should we know? And every time there is a technology change, this concern happens. Newspapers in the 1910s or so worried very much about how to drive cars. People wanted to know what an automobile was, how did it work, how did it turn, and if you didn't know, then you weren't suitably qualified. The same with the age of typewriters. So the coming age is going to be an age at some point where you will cease to worry about the fact that you cannot do analytics. It's going to be remote. Today, when you use Excel, do you worry about how it adds? You don't. It's become internalized to the process. You don't care where it comes from. There will be a time when you won't care about whether it's neural networks or regression or et cetera, et cetera. It worries you now, it won't soon. So every generation worries about what it is that they're in the middle of, where experts know it and it has not yet become commodity. Analytics is at that stage now. A few years ago, experts knew it and others didn't care for it. A few years from now, everyone's going to be able to do it, but unconsciously, in ways that you don't particularly need to care. This has happened before. It's happened many times. It's happened with cell phones. You use cell phones today. You don't worry about connectivity. You don't worry about what frequency it's using. I remember writing papers worrying about which of the 62 frequencies Bluetooth would pass the message along. When you send a message, you don't care about that. So a lot of these things you won't necessarily care about. I don't know whether that makes you feel comfortable or better about things, or whether it simply means that it's a question of biding your time. Stephen Hawking once said that every time you put an equation on the board, the sale of your books drops by half. So every time there's an equation in a talk like this, half of you are going to tune out. That's okay. The point is not the equation. The point is, where do such equations come from and what are they supposed to do? So in business, one of the things that people worry about is, what is the value of things? What is the price of things, etc.? So typically, there are two answers to the price of things and how you go about finding the price of things. Method one, you sell it. That tells you what the price is. Number two, you model it. You try and understand what it should be. We saw a chart in the morning that talked about the right kind of price. For those of you who are in marketing or those in the commercial side, what happens when the price is too low? What happens when the price of something is too low? You lose money. What happens when the price is too high? Provided you retain your customers. Good point. If you've got a monopoly on the market, like a pharmaceutical drug or something of that sort, you can still raise money beyond your competitor's point. This was a hard problem, this entire problem of how you do prices. And it was especially difficult when you wanted to do things with things like stock markets and financial projections. Because somebody would come and tell you, the FP&A person in your finance division would come and say, projections, 3 years. And you would say, I don't know. Market kaisa hoga? Kitna bechega? Questions I don't know any answers to. So what Black-Scholes did when it came about, it did two things. One is it said, in order to find the price of things, many kinds of financial products, you don't need to sell it. The second thing that it said was, in order to understand what the price of something would be going into the future, you don't need to know whether the market is going to go up or go down. Now, this was a phenomenal breakthrough at that time, because what it meant was that suddenly this entire business of looking at financial markets from the point of view of the present changed to being looking at financial markets from the point of view of the future. You could do forward-looking things. Point one. Point two, as you can see, this is an equation, there's no data in it. So you would say, how can you do anything without data? And the finance people would say, I don't need to know data. I need to know certain fancy things like volatility and interest rates and things of that sort, and if you put it into the formula, it gives me an answer. So, for the first time, you had a model that could give you projections with no data. Now, how did it even work? There's disagreement as to whether it did work or not. This culture proceeded so well that up to around 2006, 2008, we were building fancier and fancier and fancier models. Lots and lots and lots of money were being put into it before people realized that some of these models weren't any good. After everyone lost a lot of money. So today you have to report something called model risk these days. But the innovation at that time, and what happened, was that there was a change between saying that I can model, abuse of language, I can model the hell out of any problem. That changed the confidence of a whole generation of people. from doing essentially spreadsheet kinds of analysis to doing this kind of predictive analytics, using things like Monte Carlo simulations, using a computer to do various kinds of projections and various kinds of forecasting. This trend is still continuing. This is still a rule. This is still a way of doing things in situations where forecasting is important. Now, in certain things, there's really no way out of doing this. Let me ask you a question. How would you go about understanding the risk or assessing the probability of a nuclear war? Okay. So what are the consequences? Very good point. So, yes. Okay. Okay. So you'd put a lot of data in, but then what would you compare it against? What would happen if there's a nuclear strike? How many nuclear strikes have there been?
I think there have been just two.
Two bombs, if you want to define it that way. Many other smaller ones.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
So this situation exists in a number of places as well. So for example, for those of you who are running businesses, suppose you're asked to assess what is the risk of a terrorist attack in this city. I'm not asking for a number from you. I'm simply saying, as business leaders, how would you go about assessing this? How would you go about quantifying this? Red alert? Yes, at all times? Reasonable point? Reasonable point. You could say, I'm going to look at the worst case situation and model with respect to that. That's a reasonable point. If there are enough attacks, that works. Okay. Now, there's an immense amount of data. There are very few nuclear attacks and terrorist attacks and things of that sort. The data is big, no doubt. The event is small. Terrorist attacks in Bombay? Yes, you could do that as well. You could do that. And that is what analytics professionals even do. So when an analytics professional begins to build models, what would they do? So suppose I'm trying to figure out whether this gentleman will buy this bottle of water or not. Correct? Now, I have no information as to whether this gentleman has bought this particular bottle of water or not. I may have other pieces of information. I may have information on who else has bought this bottle of water. I may have information on what else this gentleman has bought. I may have information on what other kinds of sales have been happening. Share of wallet. I may have information on, do people have more water or have more tea? So I can get all this unrelated information and I can solve a very precise kind of problem. And the reason people do that is for the particular situation that I have in mind, I don't have any data. He hasn't bought this bottle of water. Once he has bought this bottle of water, I have 100% data he has already bought it, but I want to know before he buys it. And I have no data on that. So the whole profession of analytics, or what we're calling analytics today, as someone pointed out, it could be various other names, is to be able to get numerical information on a specific question to be asked by gathering a whole amount of unnecessary information around it. What unnecessary information is where the expertise is. So today, for example, morning I was listening to all the discussion around the pharmaceutical industry and you were trying to figure that out. In this room was trying to figure it out for yourself. Doctors cannot, the pharmaceutical representative cannot talk to patients. That's the data you want. If you do not have that data, what do you have around it that might resemble it? And there was some thinking around what that could be, etc. But that problem is the problem that all these methods were designed to solve. The option hasn't been generated, let alone being sold. The financial market is uncertain. Still, I need to know something about it. What about the past is relevant? What can be analyzed? What can be modeled? What can be forecast? And how certain and uncertain am I of it? That problem has different solutions in different places. What other places can that solution be in? In marketing, there was an event that changed the analytical way of doing things or the statistical way of doing things from a statistician's perspective. So there's a journal, Marketing Science. Marketing Science brought out an issue some years ago on saying, what is the field like? What is it evolving like? And all the authors, etc., pointed to one particular point in history where they said it changed for the profession. And the single thing that they pointed to was the scanner. What did the scanner do? Yes. It converts a physical into electronic form. In other words, it generates data from an activity. Now, there were ways of doing marketing before the scanner. One way of doing marketing was to look at things like sales data. What got sold? Now you say, marketing is about the future. I'm not interested in the current customer. I'm interested in the future customer. So then I'd say, what do I do about the future customer? For the future customer, I could go and I could ask him, sir, are you going to buy this machine? And he'd say, yes, no, maybe. So I have past data and I have future opinion. And a lot of research and a lot of analytics was about putting these two things together. So you do things like conjoint analysis and all kinds of things. So there'd be analysis of sales data and there'd be surveys. The scanner changed that, because what the scanner said is that irrespective of what you said you would buy, I know what you bought. It's not your opinion anymore. It's an actual observation. And it's not an observation on a quarterly basis or on an annual basis on audited balance sheets. It's an observation that's happening now. Which means that you suddenly had access to what people are actually up to now. Different from what they were up to before and different from what they are saying they're up to now. So with this data, people came up with all kinds of interpretations as to the difference between the past and the present, the difference between opinion, and there have been wonderful theories on it, on rationality, on whether people actually behave the way they say they would behave. It was discovered by quite a number of people that people aren't logical. People don't necessarily go by dictums like lower the price, more the demand, and things of that sort. So the theory went out of the window a little bit. The empirical science of marketing became a lot more sensible. Today, what do you do with this? Today, this has come to a next generation. You're saying it's not just about scanning, it's not just about buying, it's about this whole environment around buying. What are you talking about buying? Social media kinds of things. Now, in the context that I just said, social media, a comment in social media now becomes very interesting. A comment in social media now becomes, oh, I like Pepsi more than I like Coke. No disrespect to either brand. Right? But what would that tell you about that person? On one side, it's like scanner data, which means it's a real-time opinion. On the other hand, it's like a survey. You're asking someone. And that someone may or may not do exactly what it is that they said they would do. So now all these worlds to some extent are coming together and they've created a little bit of a mess. And the field is requiring new kinds of understanding, combinations of how people think, how they generate data, who writes it, who chooses not to write it. So one example that at least has stuck to my mind, I may have given it before. So when Sourav Ganguly was captain of the Indian cricket team, he was a popular captain by all accounts, and then he was removed. And the press in Kolkata went nuts. So there were surveys out there. Should he be removed? Should he not be removed? Option 3, don't know, don't care. Data, 70% should not be removed. 10% should be removed. 10% don't know, don't care. Now, how do you interpret that 10% don't know, don't care? So one version of the argument would be, if you don't care, why are you responding? It's like a survey that was carried out a few years ago. Question 1, have you ever committed suicide? Question 2, if yes, were you successful? And there was yes and yeses in the questionnaire. So one part of it is that the data that you're getting isn't necessarily consistent with what this means. I worked in a company for several years, and there was a question that was asked in annual surveys. So I'm going to ask you this question. Right? Now I'm going to ask you this question, and then I'm going to carry out a little survey on you. Is your organization respected by the community? Very quickly think of a yes or a no. All right, good. You've got the answer, yes or no? Very good. Question to you, what do you mean by community? To you, what did community mean? Your clients. The social fabric. Are those two the same thing? Your potential client and the social fabric? Any other definition of community any of you had? Your peers in industry? The entire stakeholder group? So this question, when it was given to the concerned company, reacted in the following way. It increased their community service efforts, spent more money in volunteering, because the company is not respected by the community, therefore do more community service. Makes perfect sense. So now, my point being that we need experts who can avoid these mistakes. Now, what profession will do that, we're not entirely sure. Whether that's computer scientists who know more than computers, whether psychologists who can handle computers, whether it's any other profession, but that profession is slowly getting created. The germs of it are in this room, because you're worried about many of these questions, but the ability to understand how people behave from raw data, which is what computers generate. Computers are stupid things. They will spit out what you want them to spit out. They won't necessarily understand what you have in mind. So the idea of moving from things like surveys to point of sale to social media to being able to do, shall we say, social science with data. And business is entirely about social science. Business is entirely about how people behave. And the kind of, the technique that you're using is a mathematical technique, which doesn't care about how people behave. 1 + 1 is going to equal 2. It's going to equal 2 irrespective of the weather. So that kind of mathematics and that kind of algorithm is being used to study things about people for whom 1 + 1 may or may not equal 2. Right? If I have 1 samosa on Monday and 1 samosa on Tuesday, that doesn't mean anything about how many samosas I'll have on Wednesday. So that professional, shall we say, clarity is something that's coming, a trend that's emerging. This is a different field. This is the field of healthcare. Omics Labs, which is the company of which I'm a co-founder, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a device which will be able to extract information from bacterial DNA inside you and be able to figure out what kind of infection that you would have. That's the dream, not our dream, the dream of a number of people. Individually, this information comes from people. People have a lot of information in them. Billions and billions of base pairs of DNA. Each of your cells has DNA. If I take that DNA out of the cell and I string it out, that's 2 meters, roughly. So there's 2 meters of tape in each of your cells. And you've got billions of them. Your food is being digested today after today's great lunch, not by you. You aren't digesting your food. There's a whole bunch of bacteria sitting inside your stomach who are happily digesting it for you. That's a different animal altogether, a different species. You've been cohabiting for years and years, living in relative harmony. Every once in a while, there's a fight and you fall ill. So the debate on healthcare analytics is something that's beginning to get serious. It's a difficult question. The questions that were asked in the morning were enormously difficult. There are no real answers to them yet. We don't have a basis for understanding that answer. So let me ask you a question. Suppose that your entire genetic blueprint were to be available. In other words, what is a genetic blueprint? The genetic blueprint is the sequence that you were born with, one cell. That cell then divided and became you. Essentially, you were programmed to become you. So that cell, 23 from your mother, 23 from your father, for all of us, that was programmed, and you grew and grew, and you look the way you do, you behave the way you do. Now my question to you is, suppose I give you that information. Would you want to know? Yes or no? A very good question. To do what? Would you know? Would you want to know? You would? Okay. Would you want to know it for your children? Now there's a little more certainty. Would you want your boss to know yours? Little hazier here. He thinks he knows. We think we know about his. So this problem, the problem of saying that the data exists, it can be extracted, do you want to know? This is not a problem that's unique to healthcare. Right? This could be a problem, for example, you can think of a device, let's say, any kind of device, a television, a microwave, something in your home, and somebody shows up and says that, okay, I need to fix your television. You'd say, who are you? I'd say, okay, I'm the television repair person. So how do you know? Well, your television isn't doing well. How do you know your television isn't doing well? Oh, the television sends us data. Do you want this service? Would you pay for it? You would? So now this person essentially knows what's going on in your television. It's preventive maintenance. Also probably knows what you're watching. When you're watching it. Maybe even by following clickstreams who you're watching it with, or at least their personality. The fact that data exists isn't necessarily a good reason to collect it and use it and do something with it. Credit card records. Credit card records. What can you do with credit card records? You can price loans. Very interesting. So many of you are entrepreneurial, for example. So let's suppose some of you I'm going to give you entire credit card transaction record of everyone in Bombay or everyone in Mumbai for 3 years. Business opportunity. What would you do with that data? What business can you create? Cross-selling? So you're selling something, you'd sell it to someone else? Okay. Buying behavior and repayment pattern, you look at each specific things. Suppose you were to contribute your data to this and you had a choice in the matter. Would you contribute and to what purpose? So you would be willing to give your data to someone if they give you a better experience on the credit card for all of it. Now go back to the point that I just said. In order to do that, your information isn't enough for me. I need to know information from others like you, what else they have bought, etc., etc. I need to collect that information. It's the same thing as in buying that bottle of water. So I now need information from a whole bunch of people. So this sharing of information in certain cases like credit cards. You can see a business benefit. It doesn't seem to be so invasive. For health data, trickier. For insurance purposes, this would mean that if you are born with a predisposition for something, even the predisposition to be overweight, your insurance premiums would go up. What that means is that you are born disadvantaged. We have laws against that kind of thing. We have constitutional guarantees against that kind of thing. But if I have your data, I can say, sorry, sir, right? You're going to be fatty fatso 10 years from now. I'm going to give you any insurance. If you want to buy it at many thousands. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's programmed into you. Bad luck, sir or ma'am. So, in terms of being able to gather information, use it, not just in terms of ethics, but in terms of do we want to go down that road of a business opportunity, is something that's not clear. So, in the haze of interest in analytics, one of the things that should be considered, and we are all considering it, particularly those of us from data is a living, is what data do I want to collect? And how do I intend to use it, and who do I intend to share it with? There's the so-called Panama files in circulation now. 11 million or something. By these days, not big data. Million is not big data, but anyway. But there's a lot of information that is out there. Correct? And there is suspicion in some quarters that not all the information is out there. So despite the fact that it's big data, potentially big data, people think there's bigger data out there. Lots of it. And people are still saying there's more out there because they're seeing gaps in it, so to speak. So what you would collect, what you would choose to give, what you would choose to suppress, what you wouldn't, etc. This is not an easy judgment call to make. From a modeling perspective, so my life is as a modeler. I build statistical models. You give me X, I'll tell you Y. But even then that becomes very complicated. So for example, you want to take a car loan. Your income is X rupees. For the purposes of the car loan, will you say X? Will you inflate X? Will you deflate X? Depends on what the loan amount is. Right? There are economies and there are countries in which the data routinely says that X is underemphasized. The reason is because people are afraid of that X being available to other people. There are economies in which this X is routinely overemphasized for the purpose of getting the loan. Now, from an analytical perspective, you are now in deep trouble. Because two things are happening at the same time. No amount of statistical jugglery is going to get you out of this one. You just have to understand how people behave. And people will behave in different ways in different kinds of circumstances. So, in the age of the genome, in the age of lots and lots of, shall we say, proprietary, confidential, tricky kinds of information being made available, this has become a field of some concern. Many companies are now creating posts called chief analytics officers. Some are creating positions called chief data scientists, etc., etc. But those who are working with analytics, those who are working with data have to deal with some of these consequences and what you would like to do with it. For those of you running companies, should your salespeople have access to a database of leads? Yes? Yes? Should your salespeople have access to a database of leads? Not all leads. Why not? Filtered leads, the big leads, the small leads. Okay? Because what would be the natural thinking? Natural thinking would be, if you give leads, if you give a database of leads to salespeople, they'll be a lot more effective. Right? Now, what happens when that salesperson gets a better deal from your competitor and leaves? Walks away with the leads, potentially. Right? So you work hard getting the data, your competitor gets the sales. So therefore, the ability to curate data, not curate in the sense of edit it, but in the sense of manage it, give appropriate access to it, tell at times that I don't want to do this. I don't want to collect this particular kind of data. The age of the Internet of Things. Sometime around 12 years ago, 11 years ago, there were more things communicating than people communicating. So historians of such things had come back and say around 2005, the era of the Internet of Things began. Now the era of the Internet of Things, potentially, things have been on circulation for a long, long time. This has barcodes. The age of the scanner began the age of the Internet of Things, so to speak. In other words, as soon as you scan this, this entity got an identity in some database and it began. It couldn't talk back, but there are certain things that can talk back. You know, RFIDs, chips, things on ships and containers that can talk back and say, here I am, here I am. So what this has meant is that the amount of information that is coming from inanimate objects has increased tremendously. Inanimate objects are a little different from people. Most of the time, they do not have an opinion on matters. They don't have a soul. Now, that may sound very philosophical, but what it literally means is that to the inanimate object, if you do the same thing in exactly the same conditions, the same thing will probably happen. Probably. For humans, maybe, maybe not. There's a lot more uncertainty to this. But if you're now going to incorporate a whole bunch of information from hospitals, from houses, from stores, from traffic intersections, from all kinds of places, the question now becomes, how are you going to integrate that into this sort of world of people and how businesses make money? Again, we are in this intersection stage where people still need to make decisions. What do I mean by make decisions? What I mean is, we're still at the level that it says, circumstance happening, data being generated, data goes to person, person decides what to do. Right? This is an intermediate stage from the stage of no data out there, person having an opinion, using that opinion to make the best decisions, to the situation of data being generated, put into a business system decides what to do, go ahead and get it done. I came to Mumbai on such a thing. I came to Mumbai on an Airbus, an Indigo flight. Those flights are fly-by-wire. The pilot does very little. Very, very competent people, but they essentially sit back. A computer is told, fly from Bengaluru to Mumbai, and it does that. It knows the destination airport. It knows exactly what it is to be done. Almost all industries are moving in that direction, where the entire process is being disintermediated. The middle person is being taken out, as we saw in the first tonight. That middle person, in many cases, is going to be us, you and me, which is not a very comfortable feeling to have. The business act, the sales act, so to speak, the management act, the scientific act. Scientists, so much of science is automated today. We have this feeling that science is a set of eureka moments. So years ago, I worked on something called gravimetric wave detection, LIGO. The LIGO vacuum tube hadn't been built then. So I'm sure you're not interested in this, but basically what LIGO does, detects gravitational waves by saying that there is a very weak wave that comes through planet Earth due to some black hole coalescing or neutron star exploding. This moves things very, very little. Now, if something moves very little, how do I find out about it? If something moves very little, any clues, anyone? I want to detect something that moves a tiny bit. Possible, but typically sound waves need a little bit more. Too little. I'll give you the answer. You move a mirror. So essentially you move a mirror. So it's here and it moves a little bit. Now if the mirror moves a little bit, how do I know that that mirror has moved? How do I know that a mirror moves? The reflection of the light. So you put a light there, that light shines on the mirror, that reflection goes back. I measure the distance between these two things. Now for this to happen, if the mirror moves very little, I need a big distance between these two things. That distance in the current LIGO detectors is about 3 to 4 miles. So I need 3 to 4 miles of this. We're going to build one in India. So when we were building early versions of this, we were building it under the university campus, and the number one bus that goes through Cambridge went along a road in the middle, and the number one bus would travel quite often. And most of the time what we were doing was we were taking noise out of that number one bus, saying, oh, this is not a star, this is a number one bus. So everything emits gravity. There's a gravitational attraction between each of you in the room as much as you would deny it. But it's just a question of how much mass there is and how much that variation is. But this was done without humans. This entire analysis was done without humans. So science is these days done without humans. All that analysis was put in, and they kept waiting for the signal to come, the signal to come. The signal has come, the signal has come. They know it, they know it, they know it. They need evidence, they need evidence. 1 sigma, 2 sigma, 3 sigma, 4 sigma, 5 sigma, eureka. So they were sitting there patiently waiting for enough evidence to pile up. They know they have the answer, but they just have to wait for that enough evidence to come up. Science is automated now. Much of the genome operations is automated. Business is not. A lot of business is being automated in the same way. Should we? Should we not? What should be automated? What should not be automated? What data should you use, etc.? That's the debate that we have in mind. What models are useful for it? Yes, need to care about it. I want to go a little bit to the future, etc. This is Isaac Asimov, a favorite author of mine. He's written a short story in the 1940s called The Last Question. Any of you read it? There are a few of you read it, so you know what the story is about. So I won't tell you what the last question is. It's a nerdy question. But the point of the story was that there is a computer that got asked a question to which it gave an answer. And the answer that it gave was, there is insufficient data for a meaningful answer. Then the computer said, do you want me to think about it? And the human said yes. Computer got to work. Years went by. Generations of computers came by. Some generations of humans came by. The question occurred to somebody again. Asked to the computer again. The computer at that time again said, there is insufficient data for a meaningful answer. Do you want me to keep thinking about it? Yes, sir, please do. Kept doing. By this time, humans have evolved. Humans have changed. The question gets asked again. And again, it gives the answer, insufficient data for a meaningful answer. I won't tell you how the story ends. But my point is twofold. One is, there is the general holy grail in all data to use data to be intelligent. Now, intelligence is a very human thing. What we mean by intelligence is think like me. What is intelligence? Think like me. This is a problematic when building a product. So quite a few people have built recommendation engines. There's something called recommendation engines. Do you know what a recommendation engine is, anyone? Recommendation engines, say sales recommendation engines, lead recommendation, they recommend something to you. Recommend you sell this product. Right? Recommend this treatment. Recommend this supplier. So there's a problem with recommendation engines. If you go to an expert in the field, let's say you go to a salesperson and you say, here is my recommendation engine is saying this is what you should offer to the next customer. The salesperson has an answer in their mind already. Suppose you give the same answer. What will the salesperson say? I knew this anyway. Suppose that your recommendation engine gives a different answer. What will the salesperson say? He doesn't know anything. So this is a practical problem. Those of us who are out there building and trying to sell recommendation engines deal with this all the time. If they agree with human intelligence, why should I pay for it? If they disagree with human intelligence, then it's not intelligent. It's saying something I don't agree with. In certain cases, this is very important, because suppose this is for medical treatment. Suppose this is for medical treatment. What we were trying to build at that time, and I'll be candid what we were trying to do, we're essentially saying you take scans of the lung. Now, when you take scans of a lung, you get lesions in case there are cancer, etc. Look up the database of all these scans that have been done before. In that database, there's a diagnosis. There is also a future progression of the disease. So suppose I have all of that, and I basically tell you, by looking at your scan, this is what your scan looks like, and this is what scans like yours have been and how they have progressed in the future. Suppose this is the product that I have. Now, if this product agrees entirely with what the doctor says, the doctor will similarly say, what's new? If this product disagrees with what the doctor says, I'm not going to take a risk on my patient. Which one? The doctor's thing? Would you? You'd stick with the machine. You're a true analyst at heart. The machine, the data. Than one person. Which is exactly the form of intelligence that artificial intelligence and all of this is trying to get. GoFi stands for good old-fashioned artificial intelligence. You'll hear more about AI in the future. But intelligence, the idea that lots and lots of people have, the wisdom of crowds, so to speak, and I can learn that and I can figure out how individual people will behave based on that, is an idea. It's not necessarily a very sensible, meaningful idea. Every person is different from the average. Nobody is average. Which means that if you build a model for the average, it will work for nobody. But the average is all that you can build for. This is also causing difficulties, and there's a philosophy called Bayesian analytics, which tries to do this. Give me the opinion of the average, and then let me customize that for you, putting your data in. And there's a lot of interest in Bayesian analytics today, and the kinds of models that it builds. The other thing that I want to talk about is this point that says that there is insufficient data for a meaningful answer. There is a tendency to believe that given data, the answer must exist somewhere. An answer exists somewhere, right? But may not be to the question you're asking. And there are many, many kinds of examples around for this. They're sort of roughly in the following nature of Akbar and telling Birbal to go and find some stupid people in the kingdom for him, going out, looking at a gentleman, looking in the dark and saying, what are you looking for? I'm looking for my ring. Where did you lose it? I lost it there. Then why are you looking for it here? There's more light here. So the data is going to exist in a certain place. In the world of big data, you won't have a great deal of control over it. But is that where you want to look? Is that where the answer to your problem is? If, for example, suppose you are trying to figure out the problem that you're trying to look at is what kind of fraud is likely to be perpetrated on my credit card? Where is the answer to that question? So I'm a credit card company. I very much care about that answer. Is the answer to that question in the data that I have? Yes, which is what fraud analytics makes fraud analytics very interesting, and why people use methods like neural networks for it. Methods like regression is, if history was like this, then the future is also going to be like this. Some things like neural networks say, no, it may change, and I'll figure out a way of changing. It pays a price. it asks for more examples, it asks for more ways of doing things. But there are many questions that data is incapable of giving you an answer to. That means right off the bat, that given a situation where data already exists, the analytics problem is not designed to solve everything. So when you're faced with a situation of saying, here's the data, what do you want me to do with it? Obviously, that's not going to be able to solve everything for you. There are times when the answer is there, but you just need to be slightly clever about it and sort of think backwards, think a little, weirdly about it. Here's an example that's easy, and I'll end with this probably for questions, etc. So in the Second World War, there were planes that would fly over Europe, and they would come back with data on where they were shot. The engineer said, I want to reinforce it. So now the question is, where do you want to reinforce the plane? Where there are bullet holes or where there are no bullet holes? Let me ask the equivalent question. You have sales teams. Those sales teams are coming back to you with data on where they have sold. Do you want to invest in where they have sold or where they have not sold? Why? Those are prospective customers. In other words, that's the place where there appears to be a problem. Where I've sold is where I can make money. I'm already assured of that. That's an alternative way of looking at things. Okay. So you'll go after both. You'll go after places where you are, no? So I have a plane here. I can't draw a plane, and it's got holes in certain places. So I've got 100 planes coming back. I consolidate the data on all the planes, and they have holes. This doesn't fit up. There are places where there are holes, and there are places where there are no holes. Where do I put the extra sheet of metal? I'll tell you what the answer is. Where there are no holes. Why? Because the gunfire came from the ground. It came as a spread. It hit everywhere on the bottom of the plane. The places where it hit the bottom of the plane, that plane didn't come back. The places where it came back and you saw the data, the plane was okay. You saw the data. This problem is a serious problem. Right? As marketing, for those of you who are in marketing professionals, you have a lot of loyalty card data from whom? Repeat customers, they're already loyal. Who do you want data from? The loyal customers, and also from the people who are not using the card or who didn't buy the card. You want data precisely where it doesn't exist. This problem is called reject inference, by the way, the one that I just described. So therefore, there is insufficient data for a meaningful answer, in my opinion, should be the default answer. The answer to the problem is there is insufficient data for a meaningful answer unless there is evidence to the contrary. Unless there is data that specifically says this is what should happen. Going back to my big data challenge, right? Here is the data. What do I want to do with it? When life gives you lemons, make lemonade, right? So if life's given you lemons, or the particular data that you have, you certainly squeeze it, and you'll certainly get, information from it. But what information you would get, and you can use it appropriately. You can say, yes, this is what would happen. The older people are, the less healthy they are. Is that correct? If you look at some health parameter by pure decay, the older cars are, the more wear there is. Is that correct? The older the car is, the more wear there is. Now, if I go and I look at the data, will I see that? I'll end. You're giving me a hint, right? Okay. If I look at the data, what will happen? I looked at the wrong data, as he said. If I look at the data on cars, here's what I'll see. I'll see a whole set of cars on Mumbai roads, correct? The oldest car, imagine the oldest car on Mumbai roads. Is it in good shape? It's in very good shape. Why? If it's on the road, it's in good shape. An old car that is on the road, the fact that it's on the road tells you it's in good shape. Older cars will necessarily be better. Why? Because bad old cars are not in your data set. So your data will show this thing, that old cars are better than. That's what the analytics will give you. Right? You don't yet have enough information to give a meaningful answer to that. To do that, to answer that question, what do you need? You need to take a bunch of cars that were made at the same time, and you need to follow them. What are the other things that impact? What you cannot do is look at the cars that exist now and see where they came from. Because that is already creating a hole in the data which is creating problems for you. So there are lots of issues. Again, this is an exciting field. One, don't oversell it. There are limitations to it. Be careful about the kind of analysis that you do. And number two, it is still a very, very human field. It is not yet a digital field, despite the fact that computers do it all the time. But there's still a lot of room for your capabilities, the skills that you bring in, and that sort of suitable marriage has to happen. Right? I'll end now, let you go back to useful things and what this day was designed for. In case there are any questions, I don't know how we're doing on time. I lose track of time all the time.
Thank you, Dr. Sarkar. And in fact, I must say you made it very interactive by actually getting in between us. And we also had a lot of questions. We are really running short on time, so we will reserve the questions for the break. And I would like to invite Mr. Chetan Bangadia, Executive Vice President, Hansas Equity, to give a token of appreciation to Dr. Sarkar, please. So moving